In October 1929, the stock market collapsed. Over the next several years, a quarter of America was out of work. Banks failed. Families lost their homes. It was the worst economic collapse in American history. But in the middle of it, a handful of people didn't just survive. They built things that are still around today. A cartoonist mortgaged his own house to finish a movie everyone told him would fail. An engineer was turned down by more than 20 companies before his invention ended up in nearly every office on Earth. A struggling manufacturer offered an impossible guarantee and built one of the most recognizable brands in America. These are 6 stories about people who looked at the worst decade in modern economic history and built something anyway. Let's start in Hollywood. By the early 1930s, Walt Disney's small animation studio was barely surviving. His first successful character, Oswald the Rabbit, had already been stolen out from under him by a distributor years earlier. Walt didn't even own the rights to his own creation, so he built a new character from scratch, a mouse named Mickey. Mickey Mouse cartoons brought in some money, but nowhere near enough. By the mid-1930s, Walt had an idea everyone around him thought was insane, a full-length feature film cartoon. No one had ever attempted anything like it. Industry insiders called it Disney's folly. To finish it, Walt poured everything he had into the project. He mortgaged his own house. He borrowed against his life insurance. Production costs spiraled to nearly $1.5 million, an enormous sum in the middle of the Depression. In 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released. It became the highest-grossing film of its time. Walt used the profits to build a real studio, laying the foundation for what would eventually become the Walt Disney Company, now worth well over $100 billion. Next, a story most people have never heard. Even though they use the invention every single day, Chester Carlson was a patent attorney in New York during the Depression, dealing constantly with the tedious, expensive process of copying documents by hand. So in his spare time, working out his mother-in-law's kitchen, he started experimenting with a new way to duplicate images using static electricity and light. In 1938, after years of failed attempts, he finally produced the first successful copy using this method. Then came the hard part. Carlson spent years trying to sell his invention. He was turned down by more than 20 companies, including IBM, Kodak, and General Electric. Nobody believed there was a market for it. Finally, in 1944, a small photography company called Haloid took a chance on him. Carlson's invention became the modern photocopier. Haloid eventually renamed itself after the process Carlson invented. You know it today as Xerox. Our next story starts with a broken lighter. In the early 1930s, George Blaisdell was a struggling manufacturer in Bradford, Pennsylvania, a town hit hard by the Depression. He came across an Austrian-made pocket lighter that worked well but looked clunky and kept falling apart. So Blaisdell redesigned it. A simpler case, a hinge lid, windproof construction. He named it after another word he liked the sound of: zipper. He called it the Zippo. Then he made a bet almost no manufacturer would make during the worst economy in American history: a lifetime guarantee. If a Zippo ever failed, for any reason, the company would fix it for free, forever. It worked. Customers who'd never trust a company with their money trusted this one with a promise. Nearly a century later, Zippo has repaired millions of lighters under that same guarantee. And the company built during the Depression's worst years is still running today. Quick break. If you're finding these stories as wild as I do me a favor and hit subscribe, plus a thumbs up. It genuinely helps this channel keep making videos like this one. Okay, back to it. Not every success story here is about starting something new. Some are about refusing to do what everyone else was doing. By the 1930s, Kellogg's fiercest rival was Post cereals. When the Depression hit, most manufacturers, including Post, slashed advertising and cut production to survive. WK, Kellogg did the opposite. He doubled his advertising budget. He introduced split shifts at the factory, which meant hiring more workers instead of laying them off. And he kept investing in new products. It was an enormous gamble in the middle of a national crisis. Investors thought he was reckless. Instead, the bet paid off. Sales climbed even as the rest of the economy collapsed, and by the end of the decade, Kellogg had pulled decisively ahead of its biggest competitor, a lead the company never gave up. Sometimes surviving the worst moment isn't about pulling back. It's about being the only one still moving forward. This next story isn't about a person. It's about a horse. By the mid-1930s, Seabiscuit was considered a failure. Small, knobby-kneed, and lazy, he lost race after race and was treated as a joke by professional trainers. Then he was sold to a new owner, paired with a rider who'd once been given up for dead after a boxing injury, and trained by a nearly blind former Mustang breaker. Nobody else wanted higher. Together, this team turned Seabiscuit into one of the most dominant racehorses in the country. In 1938, Seabiscuit, the discarded, undersized underdog, was matched against War Admiral, the reigning Triple Crown champion and the biggest favorite in racing. Nearly 40 million Americans, more than listened to the president's radio address that year, tuned in to hear the race. Seabiscuit won. To a country that had spent a decade being told it wasn't good enough, an unwanted horse beating the best of the best meant something bigger than a horse race. Our final story is about a fight that meant more than boxing. Joe Louis grew up the son of Alabama sharecroppers in a family that migrated north during the Depression, looking for work that barely existed. He started boxing almost by accident, using money meant for violin lessons to rent time at a local gym instead. In 1937, Louis became heavyweight champion of the world, only the second black heavyweight champion in history, at a time when black Americans faced discrimination on nearly every level of daily life. Then, in 1938, Louis faced German boxer Max Schmeling in a rematch the entire world was watching. With fascism rising in Europe, the fight became loaded with meaning far beyond the ring. Louis won in the first round. For millions of Americans, Joe Louis became a genuine source of national pride during one of the darkest stretches in the country's history. He held the heavyweight title for nearly 12 years, longer than anyone before or since. 6 different stories: a cartoonist, an engineer, a lighter maker, a cereal company, a racehorse, a boxer. None of them had it easy. Some were flat broke. Some were told their ideas were impossible. All of them were living through the worst economic collapse in American history. But every one of them looked at the odds and kept building anyway. That's really what this channel is about, not the failure itself, but what people do with it. If persistence built against impossible odds is a theme you like, you'll probably love our video on the 7 wonders of the modern world. 7 structures built against equally impossible odds, centuries apart, on opposite sides of the planet. It's linked right there on your screen. Follow for more stories built from failure.